Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing Dark Knight, and I should probably just open up right now with saying that 3 of today's duties are MSQ-relevant Dawntrail duties. 1 is from the new Raid series, and 2 are the optional level 100 dungeons, so there may be a lot of timestamps to watch out for if you're afraid of spoilers. With that said, we didn't have any guild hests this time. For the first duty, we come out swinging with Great Hunt Extreme, with a half and half of Mentors and Sprouts. This fight is unique in a few ways. For example, Rathalos specifically has no proper telegraphs, so you just need to know how to dodge each attack. Rathalos ignores enmity entirely, and of course, this is an extreme trial with space for only 4. But it doesn't even end there. As this fight is based on Monster Hunter, instead of wiping when everyone dies, you wipe when a total of 3 deaths have occurred, and anyone can simply return to spawn and continue the fight otherwise. With that said, as Rathalos does not target anyone in particular, you can pretty much get away with doing this with almost any group composition whatsoever, although a healer greatly reduces the amount of potions you'll need in Phase 1, which helps a ton for Phase 2. Naturally, the normal mobs respect enmity and have telegraphs and must be killed quickly. Speaking of which, as I was aware that this duty can be beaten without a tank, I opted to be the one mounting Rathalos every time, as it didn't exactly seem like anyone else was keen on it. When Phase 2 starts, another mechanic to make it feel more like Monster Hunter is that you can only heal from the potions you're given, and each player is given 10. Now, despite healers being unable to use most of their defensive kit in the second phase, they are still very helpful to have if they know what they can do. Ishuna works to remove the burn debuffs, and some defensive options still work. Notably, any shield that doesn't scale with the healing done, like for example Haima or a Dark Knight's TBN, will still work. Additionally, and hilariously, if a Sage does put Obvious Creation Diagnosis on someone for whatever reason, if that player takes any damage, you get an added since the 0 HP shield broke. The things that really make Phase 2 scary is that most attacks Rathalos does, if a single one hits you, you get stunned. And if you have a burn from something, you will probably die from that before you can use the potion. The exception being the stack marker, that it turns out you can take alone, but you need to use a potion immediately so you don't risk dying from the dot that follows. Because this attack is unavoidable and does so much damage, being targeted for it pretty much means you need to use a potion if you're not topped, and then you need to use another potion after each hit, so Rathalos can just rob up to 4 potions right out of you with that one. We wiped twice to the fight, mainly to being a bit unlucky with some deaths, but the third one went fine. With that said, I should probably mention that the next 4 duties are spoilery for MSQ in various ways. The first timestamp is to skip Duty 2, which is the 3rd trial of Dawntrail. The second timestamp is to skip Duty 3, which is the level 97 dungeon. The third timestamp is to skip Duty 4, which is the level 99 dungeon. And the fourth timestamp is to skip Duty 5, which is one of the optional level 100 dungeons. I will not mention this again. Now, for Duty 2, we went to Interphos, where one of our healers seemed to never zone in. We waited a good 5 minutes before replacing them, and the replacement took a further 4 minutes. In the meantime, I discovered that Liz the Red Mage was actually watching one of my stream VODs at this time. Wink, nudge, I stream around 3 times a week. You can more easily catch the streams with a notification from the channel's Discord server as well if you fancy, link in the description. Now, once the duty finally was underway, nothing particularly unusual happened. The particular thing I guess is worth talking about is absolute authority. The countdown initially makes some players believe that it takes a tank limit break, which, as you can see right here, is not the case. But not only that, if your group happens to have duplicates, there's a real possibility that you won't even have LB3 in time for it. Also, remember during the mechanic and all the dodging that there's both Friendship Doritos and an acceleration bomb shortly after, and either one can hurt badly if you mess it up. And also, in case it wasn't clear, in the final phase, it seems the boss just alternates between a tight donut AoE followed by line AoEs, so the optimal time to plan that DPS limit break is in the donut, I would think. For duty 3, I was an 8-minute replacement in Vanguard, missing the first boss. This dungeon seems to have a few ranged mobs in almost every pack, which sort of dictates where you park the pole at the end. This particular pole just before the second boss also has this long hallway after the last pack has engaged the battle, but because of how packs sort of seem to spawn in, I could hardly remember that this was the last pack in the pole. Anyway, with that said, the second and final boss each have something interesting going on. The second boss specifically has this thing with putting up fences, which causes a mechanic that would normally involve a lot more random dodging and running to become a lot more meticulous. For the spinning cones, I recommend taking the time to pass around the fences between GZDs. The boss also comes with acceleration bomb, and a mechanic that specifically requires you to think about where you will be standing when you have to stop for the bomb. The main killer mechanic of the final boss is the Slitherbane rearguard and Slitherbane foreguard. The slash itself is mostly insignificant, but the rear or foreguards tell you whether an immediate follow-up cleave will hit in front or behind the boss, so keep an eye on that cast bar. For duty 4, I was a 3-minute replacement in Origenics, and it turned out that the only original player in this group was the ninja. According to them, the group did a big pull, wiped, and then everyone just left. No willpower, no determination. This is not big Warrior of Light energy. One try, really? Anyway, once we had finished filling in the group, we went through the duty as normal. As a tank, a particularly confusing part about this dungeon is how often it sends you one pack, like halfway through a hallway, while not allowing you to pull more. It gets extra confusing exactly because many of the packs in the dungeon suddenly come at you teleporting in and such, so just because there's nothing else down the hall doesn't mean there is nothing down that hallway, leading me, and probably other tanks, to pull much further than they needed to. Of the 3 bosses, I feel the first one specifically has a mechanic that requires a bit of talking. It does this mechanic where it slams a blob of slime which produces a bunch of circle AoEs. I am reasonably confident the circles are randomly placed in the side of the room the slam was in, meaning that, while yes, sometimes you can get lucky and find a free space where you happen to be, I would recommend handling the mechanic like a proper half-room cleave to be on the safe side. Finally, the weird turtle before the final boss. Supposedly, you can sleep it, but it is immune to stuns, enabling, for example, a healer or a mage to stop the giant circle AoE, but not a lot of players know this. In fact, I don't think I've seen someone do it yet. It is a very funny detail, I have to say. For duty 5, I was a 1-minute replacement in Tender Valley, and at this point I'm really feeling that there are a lot of levers today, huh? Strange. Anyway, throughout the dungeon I felt like packs dragged on just long enough that I started to run out of cooldowns and get concerned, which I don't feel happens normally. I don't know if this is me having too high expectations or if something really was wrong. A follow-up tip for the final boss, an extension of what I've said about the labyrinth mechanic previously, is if someone is clearly having trouble finding the safe spot, quickly go back to the center and try to direct them. You know, once you get it wrong once or twice, it is not uncommon to start panicking and then just guessing randomly, and that just makes things worse, so try and help each other. For duty 6, we went to Malikah's Well, a dungeon that is notorious for having some really heavy-hitting mobs right at the start, not to mention the Gigapole before the second boss. The Gigapole is particularly interesting because the pack just before is so small you don't really need to use any major cooldowns. This leaves you both your 30% cooldown and your 20% cooldown for the big pull, making it much easier. Speaking of the second boss, I suppose it is a decent fight to talk about knockback cancelling. Did you know that if you use a gap closer like Shadow Stride while actively being pushed, you can cancel the knockback completely? This fight does not at all require it, as standing close enough means there's no danger of landing in something bad by just waiting, but given how often the boss does perform a knockback with no major danger, it might be a good fight to practice this trick on. By the way, did you know that a warrior can solo this dungeon synced? I probably already mentioned that one. For duty 7, we have Praetorium, and I'm not sure what to tell you. If I didn't know better, I'm caught in a game show and all 3 of my party members, in various degrees, are actively messing with me. The white mage didn't cast Holy a single time and spent a lot of time just standing there. Also, a lot of Cure 1s and 2s were cast, as well as Malikah 1s and 2s. Now, all of this would have been perfectly fine, but they had level 90 gear with like pentamelts in it and stuff, so I guess I expected a bit more? Our ninja, who was wearing level 70 tombstone gear, also used single target dotons a few times in the duty, and on the narrow fight, I was very confused that the dancer completely ignored the Magitech claw. Finally, on the last boss, I also saw the dancer standing still dancing far too far away from an enemy, and my best guess is that they don't know you can move while performing standard step. Again, all this would be perfectly reasonable, but they had level 100 tombstone gear. This led to a very confusing run for me, as you can probably imagine. For duty 8, we're going to one of the new raid bosses, so jump to this timestamp if you don't want to see that. With that out of the way, we have M2N, Honeybee Lovely. I really must say, the fact that this Love Me Tender mechanic overlaps with the 2-minute burst so consistently is really something. Very difficult to not drift those cooldowns while also trying to not get caught by this bullet hell. Obviously, that's intentional. Anyway, my burst drifting a bit and me having to use Unmend a few times aside, I actually didn't get hit by any avoidable mechanic in this try at all. I can't really give much advice here, since unless your entire group is working with you, I don't think this can be controlled more than realizing it is just total chaos. I guess one tip to consider is to not cross the stack streams. You die if you stand in both. One way you can work around the chaos in the B is for beat you to a bloody pulp mechanic, where all the line AoE shoot all over the place, is to consider standing your ground unless a line is pointing at you. Easier to figure out if your spot is safe if it doesn't change too much. For duty 9, I was a 4-minute replacement in Mhigo. I have 2 tips for this one. The Gigapole in the middle before the second boss, remember that the gorillas have tank busters they do randomly, so be careful to not sit at too low HP. Similar to the Gigapole in Malikah as well, as there is no AoE pull before or after this one, you can safely throw everything at it. Just make sure to space it out so you don't sit with nothing big left halfway through the fight. A tip for Xenos at the end is that his tank buster, with the 3 slashes, you can sidestep the 2 follow-up slashes to massively reduce the damage of the mechanic. Incidentally, this is almost outright required for a warrior to solo this synced, although the DPS check there at the end is the harder part. Finally, for duty 10, we have another one of the optional level 100 dungeons, so jump to this timestamp if you don't want to see that. We of course went to Strayborough Deadwalk, and if anyone is keeping a count on this, you can set the day since Kai got hatted by Leonarg I to 0. But I didn't get grabbed by any of the children this time. I took a closer look at the second boss with the teacups, and it does seem like, consistently, the first set of teacups it ultimately ends up 180 degrees around the arena relative to where it starts. For the second set of teacups, it seems to consistently be the case that ghosts go on opposite teacups, they then first spin 180 degrees, then do a full 360, and then end up about 90 degrees and a bit before they explode. Essentially meaning that the safe spots will be around where the ghost teacups start. I've yet to have a lot of practice with the third set, since the boss tends to die before they come out, but my guess is that the third set, the ghosts go on teacups about 90 degrees apart, and while they still go 180 degrees, then like almost a full spin, they seem to go 90 degrees less or something, instead of 90 degrees more. This set was quite strange. I was a replacement for so many duties. Do we have an epidemic of tanks that leave for nothing, or was it just a case of a lot of tanks that had somewhere to be on a Wednesday afternoon? Anyway, while we had 0 guild tests for once, we instead had an MSQ roulette, which normally I would say it was almost worse, but this particular one was definitely worse. On the bright side, this evens out the total tally a bit, right? Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, Shadow Stride was an attack called Plunge, which basically did the same thing, just while also doing damage. As Enhanced on Mend reduced the cooldown of Plunge as well, Enhanced on Mend could, in a weird way, be considered a potency buff to Unmend. Not that it ever really mattered, especially because it could drift Plunge out of buff alignment in a weird way.